guess I should kick off.
All right, that's okay. Now we can, yeah. Well, go ahead, David. Yeah.
Right, I'm David Newton. I'm a partner at Trinity Bridge. We're a boutique consulting business, and I'm one of the founders of CFO Connects. Just very briefly, 3 things about CFO Connects. I've got a passionate belief that CFOs are extremely badly served when it comes to getting information about how to do their jobs better. We also believe there'd be a real benefit for creating a community for CFOs so they can actually help each other with debates and solving problems rather than reaching out to the nearest consultant every time. And thirdly, we want to run some social events because we really want you to get to know your peers, get out more, and enjoy life. We'll talk more about that at the end of the session if there's time. Briefly, this is going to be roughly 20 minutes of slides from me. 4 main messages. We're going to look at business modeling. We're going to just show the context and who the stakeholders are for business modeling. We're going to run through the findings of a survey we ran on the forecast process, which seems to be a process of particular pain in a lot of companies. We're going to slightly show why Excel on its own is not fit for purpose as a business modeling tool. And finally, we're going to show that there is a better way, and it happens to be cheaper as well. Okay, so we're kicking off with the diagram here. You hear a lot about digital finance, transformation of the finance function. In all cases, we're right on the left-hand side, top left of this diagram. It's all about transaction processing, artificial intelligence on that, automating workflow, and automating the month-end close. In particular, if, like me, you get bombarded with requests from Blackline to attend webinars about automating the month-end close, that's pretty much where a lot of the focus is. I was listening to one CFO on video talking about how proud he was of the automation of the month-end close, and he finished off his little speech by saying, "But of course, we still spend a week to fill in all the dashboards." And I nearly fell off my chair because clearly he's not even thought about automating the information coming out of the general ledger into something that you might call a business modeling system, where you can hang all your dashboards and they will dynamically update and give you all the information for the board that you could possibly want. On the right-hand side at the top here, there's also quite a lot of non-financial data. You think about marketing campaigns, click-through rates, maybe audience metrics if you're putting content out. You also think about maybe what comes out of your HR system. You have KPIs around staff churn, hiring rates, lead times on filling vacancies. There's a lot of things that you do not find in the finance function which need to be integrated and automated into your business modeling system. And it needs to be a system which comes with tools to help you do the job. In particular, there's 3 different processes which are supported by a business modeling system. It always starts with strategy if you're doing things right. So really, the 3-year plan should kick off your annual process. It can be a relatively light process, but some companies can take up to 2 months doing it. But it allows you to plan and take a longer-term view of your business to set a strategic direction and what the really transformational projects over the next 3 years may be. What comes out of the 3-year plan is maybe a first decent look at the next year ahead, which really is the first version of your budget process. Budget processes can be horrendous, sometimes 4 months, maybe even longer. Some people would say they never end and go into immense detail. But the main purpose of a budget is to set next year's targets, and the whole of the business will be dependent on that because very often, almost always, their incentive plans will be dependent on targets being set in the budget process. Once the budget process is done, you're then tracking how you get on against the budget in the forecast. So the main function of the forecast is to manage risk. You're measuring performance against what you said you'd achieve, and it's really an opportunity for management to be able to assess the degree of risk that you've got in the business in the year to see how close you might be to budget or whether indeed you can exceed budget. There's a whole different bunch of stakeholders involved. Senior management use all of these 3 tools for planning, target setting, and risk management. Down at the grassroots level, the finance function is really important given that it takes up so much of their time for their credibility and their career development that they have a good process for business modeling. As a CFO, you can use business modeling and business intelligence as a way to help develop people. throughout the business, managers, sales managers, marketing managers, HR managers, they're all using budgets and forecasts to work out how much they can still spend and how their incentive plans are tracking. And even outside the company, investors need to be informed about how things are going, because it can affect share prices in public listed companies and it can affect investment plans. So it's very, very natural for the CFO to be at the center of this process and to drive it in a proactive way. The CFO should constantly be looking at ways which are not going well in the business here, in the business modeling process, and finding better ways and more effective and efficient ways of operating. It's very natural in times of economic uncertainty that forecasting frequency and the demands on the finance function to forecast go up. I remember very painfully how this played out in 2008 during the economic crisis. And although we had a quite light monthly forecasting process at the time, suddenly I had a weekly forecasting process imposed on me, and it was horrendous. It was miserable for everybody. And guess what? The more frequently we did the forecasting, it did not get any more accurate or any better. It did not help anybody run the business better. It was just a complete and utter drudge. So we asked a survey. We asked people, 100 CFOs roughly in Hong Kong and Singapore, about frequency, number of scenarios, the resources that go into the forecasting process, and the software tools that are used, because these are 4 things that are very important elements for a good process. Done badly, the difficulty of forecasting just compounds in an exponential way. So what came out of this on frequency? Yes, it's getting worse. 33% of finance departments are forecasting at least weekly. In fact, 30% say that forecasting is now effectively on demand. That's horrendous. 1 in 3 people almost effectively can go into work one day and their CEO can turn around to them and say, "Oh, we need another version of the numbers. Can you have something on my desk for the morning, please?" Almost 3/4 of CFOs say that demands on the finance function are increasing. Of the subset of people who said that forecasting is a constant drain on the whole business, nearly half, 48% of those businesses are forecasting at least weekly, and 17% are forecasting completely ad hoc. 2/3 of people, more than 60%, are running multiple scenarios. And very few people are finding this easy. Only 7% believe that forecasting is a simple extension of the month end. And 1/3 of people are saying that it's a constant drain on the whole business. And what makes it worse, 90% of people are only using Excel for this process. And as we will see shortly, it's simply not good enough. At this point, I'd just like to introduce Shin, who's on the panel, who's been a very experienced CFO. And Shin has obviously therefore been in the middle of this process, running the finance departments to produce this and also explaining the results to the board. So Shin, maybe perhaps you could give us a little bit of a perspective on your experiences in this.
Yeah, thanks, David. Okay, there's a lot of echo. Is it fine that I continue? Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, as someone who has been in the in the finance profession for a couple of years, and we have been running a lot of forecast exercises. I think there are a few things that companies overall we need to ask ourselves when we embark on this forecast journey is, why are we doing this forecast? I mean, to a lot of listed companies, we are doing the monthly or the quarterly forecast because of the quarterly earning calls for the Wall Street. So we want to make sure that we derive a good set of financials to manage the street's expectation. I guess the question would be, if that is the case, do we still need to do a monthly forecast to that level of granular level of details, right? So I think that's the first question I think we need to ask ourselves as CFOs. Secondly, I think one of the questions I always ask is, I mean, we are running multi-millions or sometimes billion-dollar companies. So why are we doing forecasts to the dollars, right? I mean, is that really relevant? The time and effort that goes into it, does it really create value? I mean, we are taking time away from stakeholders like even the business owners, business managers who should be out getting deals instead of sitting down with us managing the numbers, right? So is that time well spent? And thirdly, I think as what David has said, I mean, forecast is actually a management of risks and opportunities to our budgets or to the numbers that we are working towards too. If that's the case, can we not just do high level risk and opportunities analysis monthly? But one of the, I think when I was with Varcom, I think that was what we were working towards. However, I think one of the issues that we did run into is that while that was what we were working towards, but as managers who reports to other managers, we get worried about the questions that might be asked, when we present our numbers, right? So because of that, we make sure that we actually ask for more details from people that we are getting numbers from. And with the levels, that goes down, at the end of the day, while we are presenting a high level of risk and opportunities, but the amount of details that we are asking from the business is horrendous. And so that doesn't make it any more efficient, even though that was the end goal that we were trying to work towards. So I guess, in order for us to make sure that the change is implemented effectively, we need to make sure that we educate the stakeholders as well of the changes so that they buy in with the changes and they are advocates and supporters of the changes to the process as well. So that is my view of the forecast process.
Okay, I've just got one follow-up question for you, Shin, before we go back to the slides. From your experience, what's the impact on the finance function? I mean, do people go home at 6 o'clock and they have a nice dinner with the family and everything and just come in really chilled the next day? Or is it long hours and a lot of...
Well, if you manage to find a job that can let me get off work at 6, please recommend the job to me.
I'll take that as a finance.
Yeah, I think one of the issues of us, I mean, why we are constantly looking into streamlining and improving the process is, I think we are looking at new normals these days, right? I mean, a lot of the young people, millennials, they are looking at work-life balance. I've got staff who comes to me and say, look, I want work-life balance, right? So, I mean, if we cannot decrease the amount of work, then I guess it's about how do we streamline and make the process more effectively. So I think I have had conversations with people about, do we even need to have month-end closing every month? I mean, is there any use doing month-end closing, right? And the monthly forecast, what is the value add of the process to the business? So I think these are questions which, as leaders of the finance team, we need to constantly ask ourselves, right? I mean, we have been doing things that we inherited, the processes that we inherited, because that was how maybe our bosses used to do. But is that still a valid process moving forward? So I think, yeah, I mean, that is a valid question, which I think, is a question which I think as finance leaders, we need to constantly ask and implement changes to that.
Okay, I guess I'm going to go back to the slides, so just bear with me while I share.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Shin. I hope you can all see that okay. This is kind of a pretty horrible spaghetti type diagram of the way a lot of companies have their business modeling process at the moment. Lots and lots of disconnected, sort of linked Excel spreadsheets, living in different parts on servers, up in the cloud, all over the place, with some horribly complex engineering, thousands, or maybe hundreds of thousands of formulae in there. I was talking to somebody who doesn't have a particularly big business the other day, but still the budget process for him involves 20 different connected Excel workbooks. There's an enormously high error rate in these things because somebody has to engineer this. When that person leaves the company, it's almost impossible for another person to pick this up. Maintenance overhead, just dependency on one person, version control, all complete nightmares in this world. And when you've done all this work, you have to go to a management presentation and you have to put up a PowerPoint presentation. And none of that information is in PowerPoint. So you all have to copy and paste things, do graphs. It's an absolute nightmare. So the summary really is that where spreadsheets fail is they're not multidimensional. And as we'll see shortly, even the most simple business models have multidimensionality in them. There's no collaboration. You find that spreadsheets are locked because someone's entering data. Version control's a complete mess, and data is completely unstructured. We're going to look at an extremely simple illustration now. We've all probably faced this nightmare if you've been involved in this. The finance team's done all the work, you've put all the presentation materials together, and you go and present the results. CEO comes back and says, sorry, results are not good enough. I want to see the following things change because we need to get back to budget or closer to budget. So in this particular scenario, which is a simple little software business, the CEO comes back and says, well, we're going to bring forward the launch of that consulting service in Japan, supported by some third-party contractor costs, and we're going to open a new office in Korea. So now I'm going to quickly see how well or badly Excel might handle this. So in a traditional Excel view, we might have a workbook. This is a business called David's Technology Emporium. So we've got a very simple little P&L down the page and a profit number at the bottom. Across the page, we've got a forecast, a budget, and some variances, and business units being Asia Pacific and the various constituent parts. What we would have to do here is we obviously, the CEO now wants a career office, and he wants new revenue lines on consulting and a cost line on contractors. So we're going to have to update all of that. We've also got a view in another dashboard which shows the main revenue lines broken out by reporting unit. And we have to introduce a new block here for the new consulting business. And of course, we have to take the total revenue numbers and change all the formulae to make sure that's added in, because there's no single version of the truth in this Excel. So this is completely reliant on an Excel formula. And there's also a monthly phasing view where we've got business units down the page. So again, for these P&L blocks, we'd have to add in a consulting line. We'd have to add in a contractor line all the way down the page, including Japan, where the real numbers are going to be. And we'd have to put in a new block at the bottom for Korea. Because our lives are too short, I'm not going to do that. Essentially, all we're doing is adding in a little block of a scratch pad here with about 40 numbers in it. But actually, there is a better way. We have a centralized database. When again, a simple little P&L, but for some reason, we've only got one block here and not multiple. That's because when I double click on Asia Pacific and I select Hong Kong and I hit F9, we've got our numbers, okay? Simple as that. The reporting, we go to Australia, click, it's updated. Okay, so what did we say? We need something called consulting, and we need something called contractors. And let's call this Japan. And all we need to do is just move that formula down a little bit, move this formula down a bit, and the whole thing's updated. We've got our consulting number in there, because actually what we did with that little scratch pad with the incremental numbers, we just copied and pasted that straight into a database, and it's given us all our dynamically interactive dashboards. We move on to the country P&Ls. We're picking up the labels here. Again, we need just to copy the formula down so it's actually reading something. And we've got it. Oh, but we want Korea, don't we? Let's just put this in, type in the word Korea, copy the formula across. There's our Korea number. Do the same for the budget. You can see how this goes. And actually what's quite nice, actually the Japan manager may now be in charge of a unit called North Asia, which comprises Japan and Korea. And in fact, we also have that dynamically available as well. And if you want to see the P&L for that unit, we can select North Asia. And it's there. The engineering is much more simple, much more time effective. So we've moved from this horrible tangled web on the left to this much more logical, easier to manage situation on the right, where you're writing all your data into a central database. The hierarchies, the rules, the version control all live in the central database, and your dashboards and reports just hang off it. You can have simple little Excel spreadsheets to actually do the scratch pads and the working, send that into the database, much, much easier. So one of the things that really gets me annoyed is when we get onto this subject and people say, oh, you know, I've got to write this really difficult investment case for the board because we need to get all this business modeling done better. I've got to submit this request, it's got to get through all these levels of approval. You cannot afford not to make the change if you're in that spaghetti situation at the moment. This is a real live example, and thank you to Paul Gunderson for working up the spreadsheet which generates this. Essentially on the left, we've got the before case, the spaghetti case, and the after case, a centralized database. We have roughly 4 models: P&L, revenue models, cost of goods sold models, that kind of thing. Team of 40 people, they might be in one place, they might be distributed around a region or around the world, and 12 submissions a year, 1 budget, 11 forecasts, and they pretty much run the numbers twice each time. So if you include all the models and the team, there's 3,840 submissions a year. But most importantly, because of the management of that spaghetti tangled mess of Excel spreadsheets, you've got to have consolidation people to manage all of that, actually to update all the formulas in the aggregations and the version control. When you flow all that through, it's 2,144 hours of effort just on the consolidation and the management of those things. You put in a costing on that, and it's about $250,000 per year just on the administration of the spaghetti. Once you move the rules into a centralized database and have that driving everything, you get that down to $9,000 a year. There's all sorts of other benefits down here as well. Even if you were spending $10,000 or $15,000 a month on software as a service, you would still make about a 50% saving on what you're currently doing. And just in case you're thinking, but it's all incredibly hard to make the change, there's 2 or 3 people on this call that could take a modeling system of moderate to extremely high complexity and have it ready to use within a week. So it's very, very doable, and the savings are instantaneous. So next time somebody says, how do I do the investment case? Tell them that's complete bullshit. Put forward the savings case to the board, and it should get signed off overnight. My final slide, which you'll be very happy about. What you've learned in this session: you need structured data, you need a collaborative process, you need to have a central database. Then at least there's some chance that your team can go home at a decent hour and everyone's working with a lot less stress. And you can relax and have, I hope, a cold beer. Cheers.
Cheers, David, to that. That's fantastic.
I'm very happy to pass the baton to Mr. Tim Wieringa, who's a change management consultant based in Singapore, who will drive the next part of the session.
Thank you very much, David. Just checking that my slide is showing up as well. So it's really fantastic to see. I mean, I've been discussing this improvement on how we do the business modeling with David and some other people on this call for quite some time. And we discussed it, and it goes a little bit back to what Shin was doing. What is the purpose? What is the meaning of all the activities we're doing? And I want to spend just maybe 10 minutes on decision making, on another aspect of what we are doing in financial planning. So my name is Tim Wieringa. I'm running my own consulting companies here in Singapore. I'm a change management practitioner, and you see some other details about me. And I just want to put it a little bit from a different angle. So we've seen it from a finance angle, from a functional angle, and as I'm a change management practitioner, I would like to look at it from a more of a people angle, a human side of that, what we want to implement. I'm really happy how Shin was expressing what she said. Yeah, and sometimes I see that we're just doing the forecasting, we're doing the business analysis just as a routine, as a habit, and we have long lost why we are actually doing that. And so this is that meaning on why are we doing that. And what I want to do as a first part of the presentation, I want to run through you with a short scenario, and I want to poke a little bit your feedback and input as well. So if you want to answer the question here, just give you a heads up. On the bottom right, you should have a small box which looks like a chat button. There you could type in answers to the question I will ask in a while. So just on the bottom right, there's this chat. So the scenario is, and it's a real scenario from I've been working on. It's a global B2B business. It's not a business to consumer business. They have 6 global manufacturing sites in Americas, Europe, Asia, across the globe. What is particular that they are not manufacturing for a region, they're more manufacturing the different specialties in a different factory, and they are manufacturing for a global, each factory actually distributes to global customers as well. So marketing came up with a new product, and now they're planning to allocate, the idea is to allocate that new product to be produced in Thailand, and the finance team has been asked to support that decision. So my question to you is, and I would love to see your answers in the chat as well. What are the required information points, and who provides these information points to make this decision? So just happy to see any type of ideas and inputs from your side, from the finance community here in APAC. I think that would be fantastic to see. So it's a global business, B2B. What would be inputs, and then just type in what comes up to your mind. Type in what you think are necessary information points to make that decision. So give you a moment to put your thoughts together, and just type it in bottom right in the chat. Just see what you're thinking. We see a demand plan, and Rob, that's outsourcing might be an option. So what would be the information points to make that decision if we say, okay, yeah, maybe Thailand is not the right place to produce it, maybe we should outsource it. We need market research, and maybe also type quickly next to it who would provide that this information. How does it align with the overall strategy? And what of the strategy would be the information point? I wanted to go a little bit more concrete, specific as well. What would be concrete points in the strategy? Local wage costs, maybe that's then from human resources. Availability of skilled staff, that might be human resources and head of production. Can we sell the product? Sales, labor laws, the lawyers, legal and political consideration. I think that's a group of people. Protection of IP, taxes, that's finance, culture and political environment. I think there is a different group of people which is helping them. What training is needed for the staff? Supply chain integration, risks, business continuity planning, I guess, for BCP. So I'm always a little bit curious. Sometimes I get the abbreviations wrong. So you see, thank you very much for your input. That's really what I wanted to trigger the thoughts a little bit when we're thinking of, okay, we are asked to do some financial analysis. How does that, what is the information you actually need? And what I observed and what has been discussed with David and Shin as well before is, who is providing this information? And in a vast majority of information points, it's actually the business. It's not the finance team who has access to this information, who can provide this information. And then also, who is making typically decision? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in most cases, it's actually not the finance team who's making the decision. So it's again the business team who is taking the decision based on that data. But then again, if I look if I look at typical organizational structures, who is the best team? Who is the best person to orchestrate, to facilitate, to enable this entire process? And I would argue the finance team is in a very good position to orchestrate and align all these elements. And this leads me then a little bit to the next point, to the second point in my presentation. How does now that work together with the finance team and the business team? And how does that process look like? And we in the presentation before we say the finance team is stressed, I think Shin would love to have a job where she can check out at 6 o'clock. There is a big desire to actually have a little bit more of a work-life balance. Business leaders are often not satisfied, so they get the information from the finance team and then put it in their own Excel file and do more calculations, so that and many people don't really see the meaning anymore. So what is important here, and then that's what I often do as a change manager. Let's take a step back. Why are we actually doing financial planning? Why are we actually doing these activities? And in a very simple nutshell, on a very high level, we're doing it to make our business successful, make our business successful in a long-term lasting way. And in that context is then what we can do as a finance function is to enable better decision making. And that's why I choose to have the topic of decision making and share it with you as a teaser today. So what makes this successful? What makes that collaboration between business and finance team successful? And I would recommend 4 things here. And the first is to start with, what are the decisions we actually need to do? And this is it's interesting. A few years back there was a big hype, and it's still ongoing. It's not a big hype anymore. Was that big data hype? And I was looking into it. I mean, from a change perspective, what can we do with big data? And it didn't take me very long of digging into the topic. It's all about making decisions. It's not about big data and the analysis of the big data. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing with the analysis we're having? And that's why I recommend, if you're looking at how to streamline the entire overview, let's start first with saying, what are the decisions we need to make? How do we decide that we want to have consultancy revenues, that we want to enter Korea? So these are these decisions we want to make. So what are these decisions? And then based on that, it should be a joint collaboration actually on how are we doing that, the reporting and the decision process, and mix that together with the business, with the finance team, and collaborate together and make a design on how this actually could look like for the organization, for the company we're working with. And based on that process, then it's I like to call it ownership. Responsibility, in my taste, is a little bit too weak. It should be ownership, who is doing what, and that in a context of strong relationships. So there's a balance, because we need to assign tasks. When we assign tasks too stringent, and we create silos, so that we say we want to assign tasks, we want to dedicate ownership, but based on strong relationships. And then in order to speed up everything, it's then also a thought and say, what can we delegate more to the front? The more decisions and data collection and collaboration is done on the front, the less bottlenecks we are creating. And that's something we should keep in mind. And that's where I see that we can collaborate, set it up more successfully. The last bit of my presentation is about that new finance team. And I think later in the panel we have Michael, and Michael and me have a lot of discussions around that topic as well. How could that new finance team look like? And I think Shin and David outlined very well on that. There's a lot of customer centricity, and in my line of work, I'm asking that question a lot. Who are we creating value for? And David already put a nice list of stakeholders into his slides, and it's like, there is not one person we're creating value for. There is multiple areas, multiple points where groups of people we're adding value for. And this gives us the guidance, this gives us the direction on where we want to go, what we want to do. And it might then also be that the new finance team has another strong pillar, which is more the aspect of facilitation and enabling. Not just doing everything, but more facilitating and coaching the people, helping the business to do their forecasting themselves, and with automation, make sure that the things which are not in the specialty of the business, that they can just grab it and have it available. And I think as a third element, there is a few functions within a typical organization which is able to connect the silos. But looking at, I mean, that might be human resources, might be IT. There are a few functions which are connecting silos. But I think, from my experience, that the finance team is actually the best in the position to make that glue between the silos, connecting these silos from a strong business perspective. So that's a little bit my vision, and we discuss later in the panel on how that could look like of this new finance team. A last bit on change management. How can we then create that transformation journey? And from a change management perspective, very often we want to look at what are the barriers, how can we go beyond what we already have, looking at the routines we already have and trying to establish new routines, new behaviors which are going in the right direction. And from my perspective, and I mentioned a few things on that, is the purpose. Why are we doing that? Let's create meaning for the activities in the finance team. Is that second step, is that what is the customer value? We mentioned that. We need to know what the business is looking for, what the investors are looking for, what regulators are looking for, and understand what they need. And then the third element is the how. And there it's from my experience, in order to speed things up, is that experimentation. Have that long-term vision, have the purpose in mind, but then doing the first steps right now and making small steps and adjusting these small steps along the way in that journey. I mean, and they all, as a foundation of all of these three things, is then good relationships. With good relationships, things just go smoother and go smoother, and then we can have a nice beer together, as David said that as well. So that's a little bit from my side. We are having, just want to quickly highlight as well, this is a workshop series. So we have 4 more workshops to go. In decision making on my side, we will look deeper into how to make fast decisions and solid decisions. And then in workshop number 5, we're looking at that we're not just installing change, installing the new finance team or installing the new way of forecasting, but also realizing this change, making sure that we're reaping the benefits out of that and not just putting a new software in front of people, for example, or new processes. I think with that, we are ready for the panel discussion. I'm stopping my presentation here, and I'm welcoming Chris and Shin. And Shin might be not in the call anymore. I think, David, you can confirm that. And Michael to do the panel discussion. Back to you, David.
Thanks, Jim. That was very interesting. Shin's had to go off to a rescheduled budget meeting, funnily enough, right on topic. So apologies for that. But we do have Chris Ho and Michael Zimmel, who are our 2 remaining panelists. So I'm going to pretty much ask a similar question to the one I asked to Shin earlier, starting with Chris. Chris, you're an organizational risk professional. So from a slightly different perspective on the budget and forecasting process. Very interesting to hear your take on it. I know you've had to assess the effectiveness of these models and probably had some input in the process. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that's been.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting to see how various organizations approach the budgeting and forecasting process. And what caught my attention from Shin Lee's comments, that's also relatable to what I've seen, is that people are spending a lot more time on a process, budgeting and redoing their forecasts over and over, rather than focusing on the business. And the danger we've seen is that people are using the budget as the tool to manage the business. That's actually not the right way to approach it. The budgeting process is a tool to assist. There are other tools we would use, cash flow, risk management, and other considerations to ensure that the business is managed properly. So one key takeaway I've seen is that people, yes, use the budgeting process, transform it, make it as efficient as possible. To your point, turning from the spaghetti process into a non-spaghetti process. Maybe we'll call that the lasagna process. It's a lot smoother. So that the business can make decisions that are in favor of the business, in the best interest of the business, rather than people focusing on reaching numeric quantitative targets. I think that's a danger I've seen from a governance angle. So a lot of the qualitative factors need to be brought into the process when people are forecasting, and ensuring that the actual actions of the business, is what we're doing aligned to the core values of the business, to our employees, to our customers, and not just always focus on the quantitative side. I think that's one aspect. The other aspect, and this is a little more boring aspect to a lot of CFOs here, is from an audit perspective, when we audit the budgeting and forecasting process, is quite often people forget about the back end infrastructure. And what I mean by that is quite often businesses, they're very focused on getting out the numbers, redoing the forecast, but they forget about the integrity, ensuring that there are controls to protect the integrity of the numbers. Whether it's about ensuring there's a maker checker process over formulas in Excel, to ensuring that you've got proper security, to ensuring you have proper access controls, so that when HR is feeding into the salaries for the budgets, people actually don't have access to that folder. So I think this is one area that's quite often overlooked. We actually do find from an audit review a number of deficiencies in that area, and I think this is where those who are responsible for the budgeting process, you also need to just remind yourself to ensure that your back end controls over the process and systems and the security is there. And in particular, for people now going to the cloud, using the cloud for your budgeting process is ensuring that you have comfort over that particular area. And one other observation I just wanted to share with you is, it's interesting, quite often you see the annual budgeting process. You go to 30, 40, 50 departments, say, please submit your budget. You start with last year's numbers, etc. And then you have this, debate and little bits of infighting and politics happening to get the numbers you want to get, in particular on the expenditure line. Nobody's going to criticize you for having a high revenue line if you think you can really do that, depending on the type of business you have. What's interesting, I've seen some organizations whereby the CFO office will actually change the budgeting process slightly by saying, I'm going to give you your budget, and it's a rebuttable presumption that it is correct. So this is based on the CFO in consultation with leadership. They'll give the budgets for the various departments, and it's up to departments to then fight back. I shouldn't say fight back. I like to use Tim's words, collaborate in a different way to have a robust discussion. So it's a tactic to get a robust discussion and some vigor into the budgeting process. And that seems to have a different, I don't know if it's psychological or what, but I find that you do come up with a slightly more refined budgeting process that's it's more plausible, it's more defendable. I think people are more genuine in what the budget should comprise of, rather than thinking about their own natural selfish needs, in terms of trying to overstate expenses and understate revenue, so that in the future, if it's monitored, any positive variances would be very, very good for them. So just wanted to share that bit with you.
I think that's a very good point, Chris. Actually, when you mentioned the CFO office would give a first draft of the budget and say, here, that's it, and now tell me if you think otherwise. I think that's a valid approach, but there's some prerequisites to that. So that means the language that you speak has to be the same across the business. And when it means language is the data that you use, the drivers of your budget, the KPIs that flow into that. If you are at that point, I think that is already quite advanced from a business intelligence point of view, that you were able to make very clear definitions of every single driver of your budget, and everyone in the business understands it the same way. Then you actually, at that point, I think you can do that. What I've realized in most companies, if you ask someone about a specific driver, that be it an online business where you say customer retention, for example. So how do you calculate the customer retention? Everyone will have a view of what customer retention means. When is a customer retained? Is it because the customer has been signed up and active at least once in the last 12 years? Has the 12 months? Has the user been signed up for 6 months and used the service at least twice a month? Is that one active or retained or not? So I think you have to come down to a very clear definition where finance has the same understanding, operations has the same understanding, sales and marketing has the same understanding. And then if you build your budget on these commonly accepted definitions of data, I think then you could go down that route and come up with a budget, because you can argue it, and the person that receives your top-down budget actually can drill down and see where the numbers come from and can prepare the answer. And it doesn't have to be negative. It can be, if you say fight back, yes, previously, yes, in my previous company, we talked about a budget fight, but it was more in a positive sense. There was one period of the year where actually the finance department went out and spoke to everyone in the company. So I think you should see that more of an opportunity as well. Obviously, not everybody is looking forward to budget season, but take that as an opportunity to actually engage with the business, speak to them, learn from them, and give them your views from the finance department.
I think, Michael, those are all absolutely spot on points. And I just also want to add here, taking what you've just said about improving the budgeting process in terms of a very active, positive collaboration discussion, is after all is said and done. And again, I'm just going to come from an auditor's perspective here, is when we restart the budgeting process the following year, one positive activity we've seen is for those departments that have done a postmortem, and this is very interesting, not many people do postmortems to say, okay, here was our budget, here are the variances, etc. Now, rather than talk about the variances, what could we have done better in the budgeting process? What were the assumptions we made a year ago that perhaps were not as valid? Or what were the circumstances that caused us to be too far or too close to the budget? And I think that sort of post-mortem activity, it's going back to the whole business intelligence that both David and Tim were talking about, is it's constantly improving the process. So yes, you can absolutely get out of the spaghetti situation, but once you get there, at the end of the day, you have people making assumptions or presumptions and trying to validate their point of view to what Mike was just saying, having those debates. I would recommend people to go back to that 8, 9, 12 months after the fact and ask yourselves, okay, what went right, what went wrong, and what can we do to improve it going forward for the next budgeting and forecasting cycle.
Which is good, because that means that people are already using the budget and the forecasts in a sensible way. They're not just using it to see, have I reached my budget? I'm good. Have I not reached my budget? Say the budgeting process doesn't really work, and it's not really so valid. So you're already at a point where people actually use those numbers and they know how to work with data. That could also be a contribution by a CFO if they don't look only at finance, but take over the entire business intelligence operations of a business, not just to provide quantitative data, but also educate the business how to use it. And on top of that, develop or foster a data-driven culture where people actually really use the data. And that means they would also be interested in that type of retrospective analysis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perhaps just one other little theme connected to that. I mean, the budget process in some companies can be so painful and takes so long that, a few companies have just decided it's not worth the effort. I mean, I remember probably 10 or 20 years ago, Toyota gave up with the idea of doing budgets, and they do kind of rolling forecasts, and they just think that's good enough. But every once in a while, I guess those rolling forecasts are used to update incentive plans and things. Why do we really need a budget? There's nothing special about it. It's just another forecast, isn't it?
True. I think you can do that. I feel this budget process, if done in a productive way, is really more about information exchange. As I mentioned earlier, this is where everyone gets together, and you have to get down to numbers. And it also confirms whether everybody has the same understanding of the business. If you talk strategy meetings, if you talk expanding into new markets in the boardroom or some breakout sessions with certain members of the business, you agree very quickly on what can or should be done and what should not be done. But then when it comes down to hard facts, really, for me, very often was then during the creation of the budget, because this is then when you have to agree on hard numbers. So I think there is, while I completely see the argument, and because it is painful, on the other hand, it actually forces you to put your numbers where your mouth is. For everyone, not just for finance, for the entire business.
Yeah, so that goes a little bit back to what people say. It's not the plan which is important, but the planning process, because it is instilling that conversation between the people to actually agree on something and creating transparency. And it's more that aspect which is important. The numbers are also important, but I guess what I hear as well, it's that conversation and transparency which is important, and also to triggering the change and triggering the understanding on where we're heading with that new direction, which is the budget based on.
Yeah, correct. And I think that is something that you should communicate right away, very openly. That is one of the points of preparing your budget.
And then it's actually, and that actually might then mean that we say, okay, with this in mind, I understand that the budget process might feel dreary, but it's also a learning process, and that's why I'm committing to that budget process, because it's actually a learning process for all of us. And I think that might be something to maybe not change the budget process, but at least gives a different spin.
Yes, yeah.
I also would like that, just from a purely governance point of view, just pick up on David's question or challenge in terms of some organizations just giving up budgets. I think at the end of the day, each organization has to find the tools that they feel is appropriate for their operation. And if they want to do something out of the box, by all means, they should try it. Ultimately, regardless of what they do, they need to be accountable and they need to take ownership. And I think for a lot of traditional companies or non-traditional companies, the budgeting process is very much a starting point in order for proper oversight from board members, etc., and other stakeholders. So I have a feeling that budgets will always be there, but I would agree with David's point. That is, after you have that budgeting process and you've completed it, hopefully you've done it in a very painless as possible. You can undertake many other tactics and tools to manage the business, not manage the numbers, but manage the business. And I look forward to seeing how organizations do that in innovative and creative ways versus the traditional, just let's have a budget and then we'll just update the forecast every 1 or 2 months.
Okay, I guess we're getting to the end of our session. I'd just like it to wrap up in a few minutes, perhaps to give you a little bit more insight into what we're trying to do with CFO Connects in particular. If we believe a community of CFOs is a good thing, and we want people to actually meet each other, swap information, learn more from each other, then it does require some engagement on behalf of people who are members. So I do encourage all of you, if you have any questions to ask, please reach out. We have a number of ways of doing that. Everyone who's registered for this event should now be a member on CFO Connects. If you go to the Contact Us drop down on there, you'll see a concierge service. You can just ask whatever question you want. There might be more information you need on certain aspects of this session, or you might want other topics covered in some detail. So just ping it through, and it'll reach its way to me, which may be a good or bad thing. And we'll do our best to respond. If I don't know the answers, I will certainly reach out to the many experts on this call who can help answer a particular question. So please do that. The more engagement we get, the more the community will build, and we'll build a great information service for each other. And we will get to the stage where we can have some great social events. So you can use the concierge service. You can email me directly, david.newton@trinitybridge.asia. And you can message me on LinkedIn if you want to, or I'm sure that's also true for any of the others. So please don't be shy. Sometimes people don't like asking questions in an open forum, but it's perfectly fine to send through messages. Easiest way, as I say, is on the CFO Connects website at www.cfoconnects.com. Any final thoughts from anybody else?
I mean, maybe just, David, what we said is that all of you who have joined today and registered for today will be automatically, not mandatory, but automatically registered for the next session. For sure, you can opt out. And we're looking forward to the next session as well. And also, some of you are based in Singapore, so this CFO Connects is originated by David in Hong Kong, but we also have members in Singapore, so that's reaching out here. And then please reach out to us here in Singapore as well, Michael, Shin, myself. And in this sense,
so much,
we were very afraid at the start that we're running over, and I think we give you back 1 minute, as some people might say. So thank you very much for your participation. Please reach out to CFO Connects. It's an excellent platform to reach out to your finance peers. And thank you very much for joining today, and wish you a fantastic Wednesday.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for the good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Michael.
Good night, everyone.